Hello and welcome to the Kings Weekly podcast. I am your co-host, Nick Ager-Johnson, editor-in-chief and staff writer for No Ceilings NBA. And I'm here, as always, with my co-host, founder and curator of the Basketball Intelligence newsletter, available at basketballintelligence.net, Ray LeBeau. Hello there, Ray.
Hello, Nick, and hello, everyone.
As we are, as I forgot to mention in the first part of the intro, part of the Basketball Intelligence Podcast Network, the Believe Network, and the Old Man Squad Network. So we have a slightly different episode today than our sort of usual fare. We will be doing our usual preview portion at the end of the show. But given how the last week and a half plus has been for the Kings on the basketball court, we decided that now would be a good time to sort of reset and give a state of the team as we've done a few times over the years. And the primary reason that we're starting from that place is that as of when you are listening to this, and also technically for time zone reasons as we are recording this, but as you are listening to this podcast, there is less than a month remaining until the 2025-2026 NBA season trade deadline. And news came out this afternoon, so things may have moved between when the news came out this afternoon and where things are now. But as of right now, the Atlanta Hawks are looking to trade their star point guard in Trae Young, and the early reporting appears to indicate that Atlanta is willing to and will need to attach draft capital to Trae Young to make that move work. And given that Trae Young is a player who led his team to the Eastern Conference Finals in, I believe it was year 3. It was either year 2 or year 3 of his NBA career. It might have been year 2, actually. Either way, he's been one of the top scorers in the league for many years. He's been one of, if not the top assist guys in the league for many years. He is one of the greatest shooters that the NBA has ever seen in terms of being able to shoot from 35, 30 feet plus, that kind of ridiculously long range. And yet, we are already at a point that the Hawks are publicly stating that they know that they will need to attach draft capital to get rid of Trae Young. And that leads us to the Sacramento Kings with a player who is universally acknowledged as not being as good at basketball, is older, and has a similar contract in Zach LaVine. And so this is a point that, Ray, I know that you and I discussed off mic, but I think it's just about time to bring this discussion on mic of the fact that, as we have discussed a number of times in the last few weeks, the Kings are very, 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 very willing to shop basically the entirety of the top half of their roster. And more to the point, absolutely everybody in the NBA knows about it. So given what the rumblings are about what a Trae Young trade would look like, it does stand to reason that the Kings are going to not be able to move off Zach LaVine and probably also not be able to move off DeMar DeRozan without attaching draft assets. Now, the big difference here is that Atlanta is currently 17-20, but they've been significantly worse since Trae Young returned from his injury. The Jalen Johnson-led version of the Hawks this season is 15-12, so not world beaters exactly, but certainly in the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference, a clear potential playoff contender. And, with Trae Young, they haven't been quite as good. Now, there is the obvious caveat up front that I have never been inside either locker room personally, but certainly the rumblings coming out of the Atlanta locker room seem to be less positive about Trae Young as a teammate than Zach LaVine's teammates have been about him throughout the entire history of his NBA career. So I do want to at least add that caveat. But even with that caveat, I find it hard to believe that there are teams around the league that value Zach LaVine so much more highly than Trae Young that they're going to be willing to trade for LaVine without attaching draft capital. Now, there was also a report that I saw today as we were recording this that the Bucks talks regarding Zach LaVine have stalled because the Kings are insisting on Milwaukee including their 2031 first round pick. If Scott Perry manages to pull off that trade, then that will be, suffice it to say, such a ludicrously large win for the Kings front office that even the most optimistic worldview, I find it hard to believe that happens. If that does happen, all of this is moot, obviously. But given the current state of the Kings as just barely out of the Western Conference cellar, given that they have 30th out of 30 in terms of net ratings on the season, which after their recent run of games, I've been tracking this for a while. They were at 28, 29 range for a while. And then after their recent run of games, they've dropped down to 30. So, yeah, I mean, given that the Kings are technically not in the Western Conference cellar, but they have literally the worst net rating in the NBA. And it's not like they were far away from that until the god-awful run of the last 5 games where they've lost every single one of them by double digits and one of them by 41 points, right? It's, that doesn't do wonders for the old net rating. So, yeah, just sort of we thought it would be a decent time to sort of reset, talk about where the Kings are now, talk about more hopefully where they might be going forward. But, this was something that I have to be honest, I was expecting a trade from this team on December 15th when, the significant list of players who signed contracts in the offseason, et cetera, become available for trade on December 15th. I was expecting a move then. The fact that there hasn't been one, I think, is indicative of the value of these Kings players around the league. And I'm still at the same place I was at the beginning of the season in terms of I think it is going to be much easier to find a buyer for DeMar DeRozan than any of the other Kings players because he's getting paid literally half of what Zach LaVine is getting paid. But, especially with the relatively recent, I guess it's like about a week old news at this point that the Kings are already looking to shop Dennis Schroeder. Clearly there is, noise in terms of that at least someone in the Kings office, and I'm assuming this is Scott Perry, at least someone is aware that things need to happen. But given that there's only, less than a month left before the trade deadline at this point, and the highest named players on the team are virtually untradeable for a team that doesn't want to give up draft assets, it's going to have to be a masterclass from Scott Perry to revamp this roster. But as you and I have discussed, and I think Bear's bringing up again, quite frankly, at this point, a lot of the older players on this roster are essentially just blocking some of the younger players from getting developmental time. And the team isn't going to get much worse than 8-28, right? So it's not like those guys are, driving winning forward in any reasonable way. So both given the fact that he's going to be out until essentially right before the trade deadline and, also for a variety of other reasons, I doubt that Domantas Sabonis is going to be on the move. Certainly not anytime soon, but it's a very important month for the Sacramento Kings. Not in any way, shape, or form in terms of what happens on the basketball court, but in terms of what moves the front office makes. I think it's pretty clear that some moves will be made. It definitely remains to be seen what those moves look like. So that's plenty for me on my little rant. So.
Well, you've described essentially an intractable situation in the sense that you have to blow the team up because the team is going nowhere and has any potential to go anywhere meaningful, especially with the quality of the teams ahead of them in the Western Conference and their timelines and where they stand now, et cetera, et cetera. They can't really give up draft picks. They need to be bringing in draft picks if they're going to put together a team that, has some hope of developing into what they should be. The current players that they need to exchange for the types of players and the type of situation they need are very, very difficult to move for the reasons that you've outlined. And what is the plan? Is there a plan? And what is it? You look at what you've intuited and what you've heard and what you've observed about other teams, and most of them have plans. They're not perfect plans, but they make sense in terms of timelines and those sorts of things. Look at Phoenix, for example, which was the most maligned team in the league in recent memory, and how they've put together at least the starting point of moving in the right direction with their acquisitions and with their getting rid of players that didn't fit a realistic timeline and didn't fit realistically together, and brought in a coach who had a really extensive background working for multiple teams over multiple years in the association, and has done, as far as everybody's concerned that I know of, an admirable job of figuring out how to balance all the various considerations for the team, and the team has been winning, and for the life of me, I can't figure out what the plan is. I know the interview that we all read recently with Scott Perry, talked about, well, our plan is to bring in as many players as we can who have these 6 qualities. Well, those 6 qualities are great, and who could argue with them? And as you pointed out when we were talking about this earlier, that's a philosophy. That's not a plan. And I can't think of another team ever anywhere that wouldn't want players with those qualities, right? So yeah, I guess that's what you should be doing. But and to bear down a little bit more on Coach Ott that came in for Phoenix, just by way of comparison, Doug Christie had very little useful and relevant experience. I'm a fan of his in some ways, in the sense that he's got a great history. He's got great rapport with his players. He's a very smart guy, both in terms of general intelligence and basketball intelligence. However, the quote that Scott Perry was talking about in that interview is like, oh, well, my plan for Doug Christie is, yeah, he doesn't really know much now in terms of how to strategically and otherwise be a coach, but he's going to grow with the team. That doesn't make any sense to me. Of course he's going to grow. I mean, that's what people do. But, watching the team this year, most games he's been outcoached, whether you're talking about strategy, tactics, rotations, counters, whatever it is that you want to talk about, switching to zone defenses, jump defenses, matchups, other sorts of things. And also, it's also kind of interesting that for much as we respect how much he's respected by the players, he can't really seem to get them to do the things that they need to do, because it's the same mistakes and same omissions over and over again, whether it's guarding the 3-point line or, whether it's defensive rebounding, the other sorts of things. And, is that because, and we've gone over and over and over about, how much of this is personnel, how much of it is effort, how much of it is scheme. It almost doesn't matter in a sense at this point. It seems likely that you're not going to get the players to do what they need to do to make the changes that are necessary, whether that's a failing of communication or whether that's just a failing of the roster and the structure, or a combination. I know that, watching Deuce and Mo, Deuce multiple times has said, every other team is making good adjustments. Why aren't we? And I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
And so, and I guess, and last night, for example, Mo said, after the Kings had cut or referring to the Kings cutting the lead from 26-3, they showed that for a short period of time, they can play very impressive defense that's making a big difference. If they can do that for a few minutes a game, why can't they do that for a few minutes more a game? I don't have the answer to that. And it's a great question.
Yeah, shout out to Mo, friend of the show. I do want to, there is something that we talked about in the offseason that applies very specifically to Phoenix, which is, I can't remember, I'm pretty sure it was Phoenix that I said of the Kings have the 29th worst situation in the league, but Phoenix has the worst. And I'm not sure if it was Phoenix or if I'd also included Dallas in that mix, and this ties back to the Trae Young thing. There's one extraordinarily important difference between the Kings, the Suns, and the Mavericks, which is, the Suns and the Mavericks owe most of their first round picks of the next few years to other teams. The Kings at least have all their picks, and also one coming in from San Antonio. So even more to the point, right? Like, the problem with Phoenix, which Jordan Ott has done an exemplary job with that team and made it less of an issue because they're actually already competitive, right? But the main issue was it was an aging team with, one superstar who was playing up to his billing in Kevin Durant, and one that extremely wasn't in Bradley Beal, right? But a very old team generally that, shipped out some players, brought in some younger players, had a clear change in philosophy under Coach Ott in a way that makes the future brighter because the present's already brighter, right? It's like, you don't need to recover as much through the draft, quote unquote, if you're already a decent team. So, and, also not to mention the incredibly obvious fact that, hey, if you're a 50-win team, your pick is going to go later in the draft than if you're a 5-win team, right? So, that's part of this as well. But part of the concern with the state of the Suns and the Dallas Mavericks was, hey, not only do they have this aging roster with a superstar who, we're not sure is going to be around for the long term, but also we owe a significant amount of our draft capital. At the moment, that is not a problem that the Kings have. If they get rid of that capital to dump Zach LaVine, then that becomes a problem.
And then the question is, what's the point? Right? I mean, and that's part of the intractability that I talked about. Is like, yeah, there's that, but just makes your situation worse.
Yeah. Now there are a few more positive things that we should bring up about the current state of the Kings, and I know that there was one of them that you wanted to hammer home, but I will take that opportunity and hammer home the other, which is even still the Kings have had by far the hardest schedule in the league. Like even once we got past that miserable November stretch that we beat to death in the first couple of months / the preseason portion of this season. So even with that in mind, the Kings still have had the most difficult schedule in the
The
league.
league gives them the most difficult starting schedule and then says, that's not hard enough. After the Cup, we're going to give you 2 games against who? Minnesota and Denver. It's like, okay, so you said it couldn't be worse. Well, guess what? We're going to make it worse.
Yeah, no, that extremely did not help, obviously, but even sort of beyond that, yeah, this team is clearly, one of the poorer teams in the NBA. If they'd had a middling schedule, they'd still be well below 500. But, just
They wouldn't have lost 24 of the last 28.
Yeah, like just, pulling a number out of the air, 13-23 is not a good record, but it's a lot less painful than 8-28.
Yeah. No doubt. And the other, you referenced a couple of things that I was focusing on, that being one of them, of course, the schedule from hell. But the other one, of course, that I think should give some hope to Kings fans is what a great job the front office did with undrafted free agent Cardwell and draft choices Clifford and Reynaud. And they went into the draft with 1 pick at 42, and look at the 3 people that they came up with. And, if that's indicative of, well, not only does it speak to why you want to give up draft choices, but it also speaks to their ability to use what draft choices they have in a very useful and productive way.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is something where, being part of the No Ceilings team, the No Ceilings team was shouting about Nick Clifford from the rooftops for like 3 years now. So, he's arguably been the least impressive of the players. Well, he's pretty clearly been the least impressive of the players that they drafted. He's been up and down. I think he's shown some real flashes defensively. I would be stunned if his 3-point percentage by the end of the year is as low as it is, especially because, at one point in the season he was sub 30% and now he's above 30%. I would expect that to continue to climb as the season goes on. But I mean, you and I have been talking about Maxime Reynaud since we saw him in Vegas, and it was abundantly clear. It was one of those things where I had him higher on I think I had him like 35 on my final draft board from last year. So, slightly higher than the Kings took him, but obviously nowhere near the level of production that he's been. And it was one of those things where I remember just before I ended up going over to meet with you, I was talking with my No Ceilings colleague, Nathan Grubel, and both of us came to the immediate conclusion of, oh, we were concerned about how he moved a little bit based on some of the Stanford film. And you watch him in person, it's like, no, this guy's great. This is not going to be a problem at all. And the thing that stood out to you and I the most was how exceptionally good he was at being communicative on defense, which, is something that the Kings have not exactly had very much of over the course of the last 5 years, but is also something that you don't see very often from a rookie. You see even less often from someone who's making their first NBA appearance at Summer League, and it's like, oh, they're listening to him. Like, he's in charge, right? It's like, it's not just that he was barking out instructions, it's that there was a clear respect for him as the guy barking out the instructions.
This guy knows what he's doing. Let's listen to him.
Exactly. And, it's you and I were actually talking on the phone during the Kings Celtics game, and we won't do a detailed recap as mentioned up top, but there is one point from that game that I do want to mention that I adored, which was the moment where Maxime Reynaud shoved, I think it was who was it? It was, I want to say it was Doug McDermott, but Maxime Reynaud shoving someone into defensive position. And I told you that was one of my favorite young Tyrese Halliburton moments, was when he would shove Buddy Hield into the proper defensive position, which if you're attempting to get Buddy Hield to play proper defense, that is yeoman's work right there. And so, Maxime Reynaud picking up the torch for, I'm going to shove people into the correct defensive positions. It warmed my heart. Now, obviously there are, Reynaud is not exactly up to speed yet on the defensive end in the way that you would hope he is later on in his career. But so many of the intangible stuff that we saw in person in Vegas that, doesn't pop off the screen, Reynaud had all of that in spades. And Dylan Cardwell, I mean, I think I've made it quite known many times that I think that every single minute that Drew Eubanks plays the rest of the season should go to Dylan Cardwell, and every single minute that Dario Saric plays the rest of the season, which is probably going to be quite a fewer minutes, but all those should go to Dylan Cardwell as well. I mean, he has been a revelation, and it's in him doing exactly what he did so successfully at the collegiate level of, hey, I've got no offensive game outside of 3 feet, but it doesn't really matter because I'm well aware of that, and I know where I'm supposed to be, and I'm always hanging out in the dunker spot. And, on the other end, I'm returning shots at an incredibly high rate. Cardwell is tied for second on the Kings in offensive rebounds per game. He's 11th in minutes. And he's leading the team in blocks by a pretty significant margin over, hilariously, Keegan Murray, who's number 2 on the team in blocks per game. But yeah, I mean, Cardwell has been exactly what anybody who saw his college film could have hoped for and more. It would be great if he gets to play more for the Kings down the stretch, but certainly in terms of, 3 rookies that are the first rookies picked up by this new Kings front office, in my mind, they've gone 3 for 3.
In your mind, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
They've gone 3 for 3.
Oh, absolutely. I concur 100%. And even your comment earlier about, Clifford being, having a long ways to go and in various areas. Part of that, of course, in terms of why he's not the shining light, is because how many shining lights can you have, right? You've got Reynaud, who's playing extraordinarily well, and of course, by comparison, most players, rookies who are doing well, wouldn't look as good because he's playing so well. And I think that that's not any negativity towards Clifford; it's just more a positivity towards Reynaud.
I don't like doing this kind of thing in general because I always very much want to attribute things to the people they came from. So I'm very sorry to whichever outlet it is that I am currently blanking on of who did this, but it was a rookie ranking ladder, and the top 7 picks were essentially the top 7 picks in order, and then 8 was Maxime Reynaud. It's yeah, that's, he's a lot further ahead.
Shown a lot. And I don't know how anybody could argue against that, frankly.
Well, I mean, the one argument is just that the shot blocking and the interior defense against people who weigh more than 4 pounds has not been what you'd want, but also
as part of the course. Fact that he's not perfect. Yes, you're probably right.
Yeah, I mean, that's par for the course. And yeah, he's a slightly older rookie, but as I've said before, and I will say again, I think that people dramatically over-index on how important age is in terms of, a draft prospect's ability to become a good NBA player. And as we're seeing with the Kings 3 rookies this year, okay, so they're not teenagers, right? But also they're already productive. It's not, oh boy, in 3 years he might be this. It's Maxime Reynaud is already starting and playing 23 minutes a game, right? Dylan Cardwell has played 18 minutes a game in the games that he's gotten to play and has been exceptionally effective in them. Nick Clifford is just a hair under 20 minutes a game, and he has a few starts under his belt himself, including hilariously starting his first game in a Kings uniform, which even Keegan Murray didn't manage, even though he started every game but one since, which was the game this season where he came off the bench, right? It's for a team that, as you mentioned, and bears repeating, had only the 42nd pick in their arsenal heading into draft night, that's a fantastic haul.
It's almost magical.
And, not to belabor the previous point again, but all the more reason that they shouldn't be looking to attach draft capital to get rid of contracts, because they can really use that draft capital. And,
and they're good at it.
Yeah, ridiculously small sample size, but early returns are very positive on their ability to turn those picks into valuable NBA players.
And they really have to. I mean, We had a difference of opinion, you and I, not with each other, but with many of the commentators prior to the season about the necessity of the Kings making very fundamental moves right away to start the process of rebuilding, and we got significant criticism for that. And now everybody is saying exactly the same things that we were saying then, to the almost literal word. And so now at least that's progress. However, I'm not sure how you do it at this point for the very reasons that you outlined earlier. There's no market for the players that the Kings need to get rid of if they're going to try to build toward the future and do it in a way that's going to make them competitive with the Western Conference that is so strong. I'm not sure really how you do it. I'm not saying it can't be done, because of course it can. But boy, they certainly have made it harder for themselves by delaying.
So I know you had one or two more points that you wanted to hit before we got to the preview section.
Yeah, I think we talked about that there is hope for the Kings because the record that they had with the draft and undrafted free agents. I think one other thing that is in line with what we've been talking about is the schedule. And it has so much been the schedule from hell for the beginning of this season that even though we've talked about it a lot, you can't talk about it too much. It's just been a huge factor, which isn't to say that, as you said earlier, if it had been somewhat different, they would have had a better record, but they still wouldn't be contenders, and they still at best would be, trying for the play-in. But one of the things that fans can look forward to, I believe, relative to the schedule is, we've talked about this a little bit before, starting February 1st, there's a 6-game stretch where, of course, over the course of a season, everything does even out. Everybody in the conference plays essentially the same schedule. They play it differently in terms of how many back-to-backs, where they are when they are playing teams that are playing well and when they're injured, et cetera, et cetera. But in a sense, they do even out. February 1st is the date to look to for me in terms of when the Kings' schedule finally does, quote, give them a break. The 6 games that they play starting February 1st are the Wizards, the Grizzlies, the Clippers, the Cavs, the Pelicans, and the Jazz. So to me, that's something to look forward to, and is a group of games where they really do have a fighting chance.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where when you have the 28th best record in the league and the second worst record in the Western Conference, it's there are only so many teams that are below you. But the good news is that the Kings are playing one of them in New Orleans, and potentially by the time we get there, maybe another in Washington, although they've been much better recently than they had been prior. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when you're where the Kings are, there really isn't that much room to dig below you in terms of your opponent quality. But certainly it's a far cry from having by far the most difficult schedule in the league thus far. It will be fascinating to see what the team looks like on February 1st when they start that stretch, because I do not think I will be alone among Kings fans / people who cover the team, which I'm kind of both, to be entirely honest. But, in terms of that cadre, I would be stunned if anyone is happy if the team is the same on February 1st as it is right now. So we'll just have to see how different it is. But certainly that's something that will be interesting to monitor, of whether or not it's, just essentially salary dumping some of the bigger name players on the team or just an overhaul of the roster. It'll be very interesting to see if they do. I mean, better is maybe optimistic, but if there's any sort of difference in quality of play that we get to see after that sort of February stretch.
So there is that to look forward to. And should we segue to our preview section?
Let's do it. So, as most of you presumably are listening to this on Tuesday morning / afternoon, the Kings have a game tonight against the Dallas Mavericks, who we've already mentioned a few times in passing. And this, I think, is a good spot for you to bring up one of your pet favorite stats over the last couple of weeks, because the Dallas Mavericks are, they don't fulfill one of the criteria that you're about to mention, but they do fulfill the other in that Kyrie Irving is not going to play in this game. Derek Lively is not going to play in this game. So, Ray, take it away.
Yeah, since the Kings beat the Dubs back on November 5th, the record is 4-24. And of the 4 games that they've won, 3 of them came against teams missing 2 of their best players, playing on the second night of a back-to-back in a different city that they played in on the first night of the back-to-back. So really, they have 1 win other than that. So, yeah, I guess that does have some relevance for tonight's game.
Yeah, I mean, this is something where you've brought this stat up numerous times off air in talking to me. I don't know how many times we've brought it up on air, but it does remind me of, if that's your least favorite stat of the Kings season, this is my least favorite stat of the Kings season, which is one of those games that you mentioned of opponent on the second night of a road back-to-back missing 2 or more key players. One of those games is the Kings' victory over the Miami Heat on December 6th. That is still 36 games into the season, the only time that the Kings have won a basketball game by double digits.
Wow.
That's it. It's like, I don't know how many different ways one can say that to turn that into a positive. The one positive I do have is the most recent win for the Kings before that 5 games of 14+ point losses that I mentioned earlier. That win was against the Dallas Mavericks on December 27th. So, certainly against the caliber of team that is, Dallas is decently well above them at this point, but in that same range of extremely not in the play-in, the Kings do have a solid chance against Dallas, which, can't be said for every other team in the league.
Although I will say this, for 4 games that we're previewing, at least 3 of those teams their current status can be described as a form of turmoil. They're in a strange situation, trying to deal with particularly impactful difficulties. Right when you've got Dallas, the Dubs, and the Lakers. So welcome to that party. Right? And I would say gives the Kings a fighting chance in multiple of those games. The other game's against Houston, which is different, but there's a lot of the same sort of difficult issues that the Kings are facing for the other teams. I mean, the personnel is different, the overall quality is different, the coaching is different, a lot of other things, but there is that commonality, I would say.
Yeah, no, again, it's one of those things where, there's going to be, for I think quite a while, a number of comparisons between the Kings and the Mavericks, not just because the Mavericks are the only team that passed the Kings in most ridiculous Luka Doncic related NBA decision rankings. So yeah, the Kings are finally free from that, but also from that playing game last year, where I think it was very clear that down the stretch of last season, the Kings were a team on the decline and the Mavs were also a team on the decline. But, suddenly the way that the odds shook out meant that Dallas winning against the Kings and then losing their next play-in game gave them the lottery odds to get Cooper Flag. So, yeah, I think these 2 teams are going to be tied together for a while. And certainly it is a positive that they were at least able to take the last game from Dallas.
Yeah, and if you look at the Warriors and the Lakers, and this, the Warriors, for example, have all season long been trying to, quote, figure it out. Thankfully, they have Steve Kerr, who's, historically been shown to be quite good at figuring it out, but they've had a lot of roster type issues to deal with. The most famously or infamously is the Kuminga issue. What are we going to do with him? Is there any sort of situation in which you can say he might fit? What are we going to do with him? What's the interest in him? What might be kept, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they've been in kind of a state of flux not just for that, but I would say for that and more. And then the Lakers with being without Reeves, and with the fact that their three megastars are all poor defensive players. So the Lakers are 24th in the league in defense, and the Kings are 27th. Can we have a 200 to 198 point game? I don't know.
After the 176-175 double overtime game against the Clippers a couple of years ago, I mean, it's possible. And if there's any game where it happens, it might be this one.
Yeah, remember though, Reeves is not playing, so
Yes.
probably not. But I'm looking for some degree of commonality in trying to figure things out. I think that's a common thread for those three teams. Houston is different. You can preview Houston for us.
Yeah, I mean, on the Houston side, it's one of those things that to me is purely just fun fact territory of technically one of the Kings wins this season and in the last couple of weeks was against the Houston Rockets. I'm not taking too much away from that. I mean, again, it was not quite meeting your criteria in terms of everybody being out. I mean, the only Houston players that were inactive were, other than Fred VanVleet.
Well, I was counting Fred VanVleet as one of the two. Yeah.
Who was the other? Because their inactive list was Isaiah Crawford. Oh, I guess Dorian Finney-Smith and Tyler Smith, who barely ever played. I was quite wrong about Tyler Smith.
Oh, I thought there was one of their other key players that didn't play in that game. Not true?
Not looking like it. Steven Adams didn't play.
Steven Adams.
But he's not. He's okay. So that's what it was. He's not on the inactive list for whatever reason. But
he did not play. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was Steven Adams and VanVleet, I guess, were the two.
Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, yeah. Again, it's like of the teams in this stretch, it's funny because the Kings have technically beaten the Rockets, but if the Kings go 3-1 in this stretch, which seems preposterously unlikely, but I would bet that the games that are the most likely for them to win are the non-Houston games, because Houston is in a different tier than the other teams they're playing.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. I think that does it for us, unless, Ray, you have anything else that you want to bring up?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, that will do it for us for today's episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in and checking us out. If you've been enjoying the show, please take time to leave a rating and or a review on whatever podcast player you might be using, and or a like on the YouTube channel and a subscribe on the YouTube channel. All of the above, always very much appreciated on our end. As mentioned up top, but not quite as up top as usual because I messed that up. But as mentioned up top, we are part of the Basketball Intelligence Podcast Network, the Believe Network, and the Old Man Squad Network. So you can check out all of those platforms at Ticket Rules on social media, at Believe on social media, and at Old Man Squad on social media. You can find us on social media at Ray LeBove for Ray, or at Ray Rail on Blue Sky, at NBA Johnson for me on Twitter and Blue Sky. And you can find the podcast at Kings Weekly Pod on Twitter, at Kings Weekly Podcast on Blue Sky. And if you have any feedback regarding the show, feel free to reach out to us either via any of the aforementioned social media channels or email kingsweeklypodcast@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.